Human beings have long sought to impose meaning on an existence that, at its core, seems indifferent and purposeless. From ancient myths to modern religions, from philosophical systems to moral codes, humanity has relentlessly constructed narratives to provide a sense of order and direction. These constructs, whether religious, ideological, or societal, act as scaffolding for individuals seeking something beyond the immediate, something greater than the transient nature of life itself. Yet, these edifices of meaning often crumble when questioned, revealing their fragile artificial nature. In the absence of intrinsic meaning, the world appears as a vast empty expanse. The universe, devoid of purpose, spins endlessly in its indifferent rhythm, and life itself emerges and fades without any cosmic intention guiding it. This realization, often described as a form of nihilism, challenges the very foundation upon which human existence has been built. The deep existential crisis that accompanies this recognition is both a liberating and terrifying experience. If meaning is not inherent, then it must be created. But how does one create meaning in a world that seems devoid of it? This question lies at the heart of many philosophical inquiries. Nietzsche famously declared the death of God, not as the literal passing of a deity, but as the collapse of the systems of meaning and moral values that had once been anchored in religious beliefs. Without God, humanity is left to navigate a world without a transcendent guide. The moral frameworks and values that once defined what was good or evil, just or unjust, lose their divine backing and are revealed to be human-made conventions. In this light, all established values come into question. If they are mere products of human culture, why should they hold any absolute weight? In a world devoid of universal meaning, the search for purpose becomes an individual endeavor. There is no cosmic purpose to guide us, no predetermined destiny to fulfill. The individual is left to navigate the void, constructing their own sense of purpose, ethics, and values, or choosing to accept the meaninglessness of it all. This profound freedom, however, can be as burdensome as it is liberating. The absence of inherent meaning does not necessarily translate into a fulfilling existence. On the contrary, it can lead to despair as the individual is faced with the overwhelming task of creating meaning where none exists. Yet, even within this vacuum, there is potential for growth. The recognition that meaning is not given but created invites a radical rethinking of the self. Rather than clinging to predefined values or external sources of truth, the individual is free to define their own existence. But this freedom does not come without its challenges. It forces a confrontation with the void, a recognition that the meaning we seek is not inherent in the world around us, but must be forged through our own actions and choices. The philosopher who dares to confront this void is left with a choice, either to succumb to despair and nihilism, or to affirm life by accepting the responsibility of creating meaning in a world that offers none. This idea of self-created meaning is not new. It is central to existential philosophy, which posits that individuals must find their own path in a world that does not offer predetermined answers. Whether through Sartre's notion of radical freedom, Camus' absurd hero, or Kierkegaard's leap of faith, existentialists have long argued that meaning is not a given. It is something that must be created through lived experience. However, this act of creation is not without its own paradox. By rejecting externally imposed meanings, the individual is confronted with the need to continually reinvent their sense of purpose, often in the face of a world that remains indifferent to their struggle. In the end, the question of whether there is meaning in the universe may be less important than the question of how we choose to live in light of that uncertainty. The absence of meaning might seem like an abyss, but it also presents an opportunity for freedom. The challenge is not to overcome the void, but to navigate it with awareness, courage, and the willingness to forge a path of meaning that is uniquely our own. The absence of inherent meaning opens up a space of profound freedom, yet with this freedom comes immense responsibility. When the world no longer offers predefined purposes or guiding principles, the individual is tasked with creating their own sense of direction. In this sense, freedom can be both empowering and burdensome. The individual is liberated from the constraints of external expectations, ideologies, and traditions, yet they are also left to navigate the void of uncertainty, devoid of the comforting presence of an ultimate guiding force. This newfound freedom presents a radical departure from previous ways of living, where meaning and purpose were often handed down through culture, religion, or social norms. In the past, people might have followed prescribed paths, finding comfort in the knowledge that their lives had purpose within a greater narrative. But in the absence of such narratives, individuals are forced to face the uncomfortable truth that they are the sole architects of their existence. Their lives, once determined by external forces, now depend on the choices they make and the meaning they decide to ascribe to their own existence. While some may see this as an empowering opportunity to live authentically, others may find it overwhelming. The weight of having to define one's own purpose can be paralyzing. There are no clear instructions for how to live or what to value. In the face of such uncertainty, some individuals might succumb to existential paralysis or even despair, unable to make decisions or take action. Others might reject this freedom altogether, opting instead for pre-established systems of meaning, whether religious, political, or philosophical, that offer ready-made answers to life's existential questions. Yet, this struggle with freedom is at the heart of the human experience. The question is no longer what the world means, but what the individual can make of the world. This challenge of creating meaning is a deeply personal journey, and it requires a commitment to self-exploration and courage. It is not simply enough to reject external values. One must actively choose how to live, what to value, and what to pursue. This act of creation, however, is not an easy one. It requires introspection, self-awareness, and the willingness to face the uncertainty and instability that comes with living in a world devoid of inherent meaning. In some philosophical traditions, this responsibility is viewed as an opportunity for growth and self-empowerment. Existentialism, for example, emphasizes the importance of embracing one's freedom and taking responsibility for one's own life. Figures like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir argue that the only true meaning in life is that which we create for ourselves through our actions and choices. This perspective places the individual at the center of the process of meaning-making, asserting that meaning does not exist in some external, transcendent realm, but is something that must be brought into existence through engagement with the world. However, with freedom comes the danger of nihilism. The recognition that life has no inherent purpose can lead to the belief that nothing matters, that all efforts are futile. This path leads to despair, where individuals either give up on the quest for meaning or fall into apathy. But, as philosophers, like Albert Camus suggest, even in the face of the absurd, the tension between our desire for meaning and the meaningless universe in which we live, there is an opportunity for rebellion. Camus' absurd hero does not surrender to nihilism. Instead, they embrace the absurdity of existence and choose to live fully in spite of it. This rebellion is not a denial of freedom, but an affirmation of it, a recognition that the absence of meaning is not an invitation to despair, but an invitation to create. In the end, the responsibility of freedom is not about finding the correct answer to the question of life's meaning, but about engaging with life in a way that is authentic and true to oneself. The individual, confronted with the abyss of meaninglessness, must decide whether to succumb to despair or to use this freedom as a tool for self-creation. The absence of external meaning does not negate the possibility of a meaningful existence. It merely calls for a more active, conscious engagement with the world. This challenge, to live meaningfully in a world that offers no inherent meaning, is the essence of human existence. In the face of a world without inherent meaning, the individual stands at the threshold of both possibility and responsibility. Once the existential void is acknowledged, the question becomes not whether meaning exists, but how it can be created and sustained. This challenge is not merely a philosophical exercise, but an active engagement with the world. In the absence of predefined answers, meaning must be forged through individual choice, action, and interpretation. This process of self-creation, however, is not one of simple will or passive acceptance, but involves an ongoing confrontation with the void, where the individual must continually reaffirm their commitment to creating meaning, even when the universe remains indifferent. At the core of this self-creation is the notion of authenticity. To create meaning is to live in accordance with one's true self, rather than conforming to societal expectations or adhering to external narratives. However, the path to authenticity is fraught with challenges. The temptation to adopt pre-existing systems of meaning or to succumb to external pressures is ever present. These systems, whether religious, ideological, or cultural, provide comfort and a sense of security in a world that otherwise seems chaotic and arbitrary. Yet, the authentic self cannot be found in the repetition of inherited narratives, but must emerge from the conscious and deliberate act of defining one's own values and purpose. The existentialists, particularly Jean-Paul Sartre, emphasized the freedom and burden of this task. Sartre's concept of existence precedes essence encapsulates the idea that humans are not born with a predetermined purpose or essence. Instead, each individual is free to define themselves through their actions. This radical freedom is both liberating and daunting. It places the responsibility of creating meaning squarely on the shoulders of the individual. There is no blueprint, no external authority to guide the way. The individual must navigate the world with nothing but their own choices and decisions. This freedom, though empowering, can also lead to anxiety. The weight of creating meaning in a world devoid of inherent purpose can feel overwhelming, as the individual realizes that their actions have far-reaching consequences, not only for themselves, but for the world they inhabit. Despite these challenges, the act of self-creation is also an affirmation of life. By choosing to live authentically and to create meaning despite the absence of any cosmic or inherent significance, the individual is asserting their existence in a profound way. This commitment to life, even in the face of meaninglessness, is a declaration of defiance against the absurd. Albert Camus, in his essay The Myth of Sisyphus, presents the image of the absurd hero who, in the face of a meaningless universe, continues to live fully and authentically. Camus argues that while we may never find ultimate meaning, we can still find purpose in the very act of living, in the rebellion against the absurdity of existence. The absurd hero does not seek solace in illusions, but embraces the struggle itself, choosing to live fully and with passion despite the absence of answers. This act of creation and affirmation requires a profound sense of personal responsibility. It is not enough to simply reject the narratives imposed by society or culture. One must actively choose to create new ones, grounded in one's own experience and understanding of the world. This process of creating meaning is dynamic and ongoing. It involves a continuous reevaluation of values, priorities, and goals in light of new experiences and challenges. To live meaningfully is not a one-time act, but a lifelong commitment to self-definition and growth. The individual must remain vigilant and conscious of their choices, as every decision contributes to the ongoing creation of meaning in their life. In the end, the process of creating meaning in a meaningless world is an act of profound courage. It requires the individual to confront the void without flinching, to recognize the absence of inherent meaning, and yet choose to live with purpose and intention. The world may offer no ultimate answers, but within the individual lies the power to create their own. By embracing this freedom and responsibility, the individual can transcend the despair of nihilism and carve out a path of meaning that is uniquely their own. This act of self-creation, born from the confrontation with the absurd, becomes the foundation for a life that is not only lived but fully realized.